What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 690. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you got another casualty in the house?
Yeah, I mean, this has just been a brutal winter kind of flu season. Yeah. Well, in talking to various, our doctor, but also, funnily enough, our veterinarian, because our dog was chewing on one of her paws too much, so we had to go get her one of the cones of shame.
Oh, yeah.
But our vet had also just had a kid about the same age as the Santinald. So this season, partially because of the quarantines over the last couple of years, is actually like kind of a pretty brutal flu season. Just a lot of bugs going around. So
and he got sick again.
Yeah.
How's he holding up?
Fine. He's totally fine now.
He okay.
Yeah, he spiked a bit of a fever yesterday, and he's fine today, except very demanding and irritable. But luckily, I record every week, so I'm used to that, already. And
and by the way, you may have heard another voice on the line. That's right. We have a special guest returning after quite a long while, actually, of not being on LR. It's Ben Stark. Ben, welcome back to LR. It's great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Hopefully,
not
long next time. I love to talk about Limited.
Yeah, and we got to see you at the Pro Tour, for a little bit there too. You got to come out to Luis's birthday dinner, and I bumped into you for just a minute in the hall as well. And it was great. With that, hey, we got to have Ben come on. Plus, you've got some nice takes about this draft format, and I'm also just curious to pick your brain about it more generally as well. So thanks for making the time to come back on LR. It's great to have you.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Like I said, there's nothing I'd rather do in the world than talk about Limited. So anytime. Yeah.
It's like the two favorite things you have in the world. It's talking and Limited, and we just combine them together.
That is accurate. You know me. I'm not going to argue. That is completely accurate.
And who's to say that Ben doesn't have, a nice fresh Subway sandwich right now, or maybe a coffee from Starbucks?
Can you see that? I thought I had it off screen.
I could actually go for. Yeah. All right. Before we get into our discussion with Ben about this draft format and such, we're going to talk about our sponsor. That's TCG Player and ChannelFireball.com. They have teamed up to create a subscription that every Magic player needs. You can get exclusive CFB Pro content and free shipping and tracking on direct by TCG Player orders, plus bonus bucks and awesome promos at TCGplayer.com for just $6.99 a month. So that gets you CFB Pro, right? So you get the content from CFB Pro, which is an awesome bonus right there. And then you get the extra benefits on the direct by TCG Player orders and the extra promos and bonus bucks and stuff for just $7 a month, $6.99. There's a link in the show notes if you're interested in getting CFB Pro and getting the extra bonuses from TCG Player as well. It really is kind of a no-brainer if you like to consume this type of content at all, and if you're putting any number of orders through, you kind of just have to do it because it'll just offset the shipping almost right away. So there you go. Again, there's a link in the show notes for that. Also, if you're looking to buy Magic cards, whether they're in booster boxes, booster packs, or singles or whatever, TCGplayer.com is the place to go. They of course have a marketplace, which means that multiple vendors can sell on the same platform. That allows you to comparison shop with each of these shops to get the best price, the best condition, the best version, the best shipping, whatever it is that you want to maximize for. You can find it on TCGplayer.com. Thanks, and we want to thank them, of course, for their sponsorship of the show. The show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And this is a place where our most dedicated listeners can go to support us. And also you get access to the Patreon feed and some other cool bonuses as well. And we want to thank everybody on Patreon who supports us. One of the things you get access to the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from David, who says, I'm finding some drafting success when I go for simpler attack my opponent till they're dead style decks. And he says, thanks for that. But when more complex synergies are needed, things don't come together for me. Any tips on moving to the next stage? What do you think, Ben, about, a more cut and dried, creatures, combat tricks, removal style deck versus one that maybe requires critical mass of some type of permanent or some type of mechanic?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Magic cards' values are dynamic when, the cards perform better or worse based on what you pair them with. And the more kind of meat and potatoes your strategy is, the less dynamic the card values are, the more you can just take what looks like would be good, like across all formats.
Mm-hmm.
So when you draft like these more focused archetypes, the card values move more, and you really have to know what you're doing. You really have to be an expert in that archetype. That's not to say it's not worth it. There can be a lot of success there. But it makes sense that would happen. And you really just have to learn that archetype through and through well, and get a sense of like kind of how valuable all the commons and uncommons that you're drafting are when you put that deck together. That specific.
So would you frame it that way, where like you say, maybe you're having a chat with somebody at the local game store, a friend of yours online or whatever, about a draft format. Would you say, okay, let's talk blue-black, right? Here's the cards that I don't value outside of it, but within it, gain a lot of ground.
Yeah, definitely. That's how I've always tried to approach limited. Like I've always hated like common rankings, where people go like, this is the best common in green, this is the second best common in green, this is the third best. Like I've always hated stuff like that because it's too dynamic for that. Like, when I'm drafting like red blue, I want to take like removal really highly because it's a control deck and I need to kill their early aggro creatures and prolong the game. When I'm drafting like red white, I don't care that much about removal. I'm talking about in the current format.
Uh-huh.
I want to draft like, the good aggressive creatures really highly and, efficient pump and stuff. I mean, obviously removal might be as good as pump or better, but it's not way better. It's not like really important, because in red white, I want to hit my curve and I want to keep attacking. In red blue, I want to kill their, utility efficient, good attackers, whatever, and prolong the game and then go on to win with the card advantage, scrying constantly and proliferate value. So basically, like it's kind of silly, in my opinion, to say this is the best common, this is the best red common, this is whatever, because that's only true in specific contexts. And maybe it's true in the aggregate, but you're not drafting in the aggregate. You have context each draft. You're drafting a specific color combination. You have a lot of 2-drops, or you don't. You have, broken rares and a lot of inevitability, or you don't. Like every draft, even within the same color combination, even within the same archetype, even like each draft is different, right? Like sometimes you have a relatively low power deck, and if the game goes on and on and on, you're probably going to lose. So then like, pump spells are worth more, haste is worth more. Sometimes you have a really high power deck, you have 2 broken rares, and the longer the game goes, the better it's going to be for you. So pump spells are worth less, haste is worth less. Like Magic cards are very dynamic, and you want to draft them in context, not in the aggregate.
What do you think, Luis?
Yeah, I mean the thing that you're describing when you want to go from drafting a simpler deck to drafting a more complex deck is the fun of draft for me. So I think that it's eventually something that you're going to want to get into, because you're not going to be able to fully understand draft if you don't. The analogy I always use is kind of like you have an arsenal, right? You show up at a draft table, you know how to draft some decks, like you know how to draft in this format, you know how to draft blue-white, you know how to draft red-black, you know how to draft red-green, whatever it is, but you've never drafted blue-green because it's quote so bad. And I think blue-green is bad. It's the worst performing archetype, right? By a lot of people's definitions. But if you don't know how to draft it, when you open Bloated Contaminator to 3-mana 4/4 trample and then get past Blue Sun's Twilight, like you're not going to be able to take those 2 cards and then build a deck that uses both of them because you've never drafted that. You don't have that tool in your tool belt. And I think ultimately the goal for everyone who wants to master draft, and that's part of the fun of it, is to know how to draft all the different decks and use all the different cards.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And really good question there too, David. Thanks for that. Let's crack a pack, because I've got a real one in my hand, which is kind of a rare treat. And also we'll kind of let Ben make the call here, because I want to, get an idea for how he approaches the format and what he's thinking about, early on here. So I'm going to crack this bad boy. Is this one of the ones? Yeah, it is. Ugh. I don't want to see this rare right away. All right, there we go. First card out. Well, here you go, Ben. Gitaxian Raptor. 2 and a blue, 1/4 flyer. we one of the reasons that we wanted to have Ben come on the show was because he, while we had been kind of bashing blue, he was actually saying, no, I think it's okay. And this is generally considered the most powerful common out of blue.
Let me lay a little groundwork here. Ben doesn't think blue is okay. Ben thinks blue is the second best color. And
yeah, I mean, I think red is better. Red is very deep and everything. But I
Right.
think that if I'm going to have, so there was some debate about what do I mean by that. So let me just clarify, like, you know, blue isn't the best color necessarily to pair in a heavy red deck. It doesn't complement its aggression well. But let's say you're going to have like 15 cards of one color in your deck and then whatever second color. Blue is the color I would prefer to have 15 cards of that color in my deck, let's say, second to red. Red is still the best color. I would rather have 15 red cards in my deck than 15 blue, but I would rather have 15 blue than, say, 15 green, white, or black.
I get, yeah, because this has always been, I think, a weakness of mine is, you know, I'll often hear, it kind of reminds me of what you just said a little while ago about how you don't really relate to people saying, well, this is the best red common. It's kind of like, well, what's the context? When I hear people say that a color is the best, or if they ask me, what do you think the best color is? I'm just like, I don't really know what that means. Like, I don't ever think in those terms.
How is that
naturally.
useful?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. How is that useful? I agree with you guys. That's not a good framework for a format. Like, I can answer it, like, based on what I just said. Like, what would I rather have 15 cards of the color, you know, if I had to choose?
Right.
But yeah, it's not a good framework. It's not a good way to think about it. A better way to think about it is, what does each color offer? What cards go up in value when they're paired with other colors? What cards go down in value when they're paired with other colors? Like Luis talked about. You know, even if blue-green is the worst color combination in the format, which I agree with, I think it's probably the worst of the 10 color pairs. What happens when you open like blue-green gold rare that's great, get past green rare, or whatever, blue and green are just both underdrafted, and you could put together this masterpiece in that seat. You still want to know how to draft it.
Yeah.
So I think it's, I agree with you completely. I think it's not useful to rank colors. It's not useful to rank cards. I think it's much more useful to understand when cards are at their best, when they're at their worst, what makes them perform well, etc.
Slight devil's advocate here. I know we're completely derailing the crack pack.
No,
but I
that's
think
okay.
that's totally fine.
These are meant to be conversation starters.
Part of the approach that we look at, like me, you, Ben specifically, is I want to master everything about this draft format, right? When you're seriously drafting a format, aren't you trying to like know what to do in basically all the draft situations?
Yes.
Ben, your goal is to be able to draft every deck in the format.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't engage with a specific format or Magic that way.
Oh.
And as such, it can be a little more useful because they don't have the time or effort or ability necessarily to like go super deep on something like, and a color ranking or a common ranking can be very useful. A good example of this is Frank Karsten. Frank's a Hall of Famer, right? Frank's very analytical, excellent Magic player. I remember Frank, for some formats, has said, I don't have time to sufficiently prepare for this draft format. I'm going to learn how to draft 3 different decks and just draft one of those 3 decks every time. And he intentionally is saying, I don't know how to draft everything, so I'm not going to try to learn how to draft everything. I'm going to try to learn how to draft enough, what I consider the minimum viable to have a good chance in the format. So it can be useful to kind of, you know, go a little lighter in some of these cases, and I think that's totally fine. But ultimately, as you know, people who are really deep into this and spend a lot of time on it, yes, we want to learn how to use every single tool in the toolbox. Even if most people can get by with a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers, they don't need to know how to use a lathe or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got no
lathe
pushback
now.
on that. I completely agree with that. And I mean, I would even say, like, you know, learning to draft the 2 or 3 best, most common archetypes will get you like 95% of the way. Like we're making it like twice as hard to get that last 5%, to get that last little edge. But I don't think any of us at least disagree that, like, you know, you're going to get whatever, that extra 0.5%, 1%, whatever it is, out of knowing how to draft everything. Like the example you used with the blue or green. So like the knowing how to draft everything and being willing to do so is better for maximizing total possible EV or whatever, but you absolutely do not have to do that to engage with the limited format. You can get like 90 to 95% EV just by knowing how to draft like 2-3 good archetypes or whatever.
Right. Yeah, no. And I think that's what a lot of people do that don't draft quite as often as we do. So Gataxian Raptor, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's the best blue common. It's a house. It's a big part of why the blue defensive strategy is good, because I mean, it's near impossible to tack into, and with all the proliferate, it's a really quick win condition late. So like you have an incredible blocker for 3 mana that blocks every flying and ground creature extremely well for anywhere near that, you know, that casting cost, 2, 3, 4 drops. That also is a quick win con late once you've stabilized. It's just a fantastic card all around.
Maze Skull Bomb is next. That's the green one.
Terrible.
Yeah, pretty bad. What about Malcator's Watcher? That's the 1 in a blue 1/1 flying vigilance, and when it dies, you draw a card.
Another one of the reasons the blue control strategy is good, because you have 2/2 that block well early and are serviceable for a control deck, because that's a card where you can not only stop all their 1 toughness creatures really effectively, but even if it just jumps in on a double block, it's effectively like, let's say you want to attack me. There's games where you have 2/2/2s and I have a 1/3 in that. You want to trade a 2/2 for my 1/1 cantrip draw card? Or even if it's just throwing in an extra power to kill your bigger creature and then dying and drawing a card, it drew a card, it replaced itself. Plus, like when you're more late game oriented strategy, you want to make land drops 4, 5, and 6, but you also need to spend your mana on turn 2 and impact the board so you don't fall too far behind. So that's a way to spend your mana early and then get your card back late. It's just listen, I don't want to oversell it. It's not Raptor or whatever, right. But it's a fine 2-drop for defensive blue strategies that I'm happy to include multiple copies of in my deck.
Crawling Chorus. One of the best.
Good for the white toxic aggro strategy. Not a strategy that I think is great. I think, if you're the only one drafting it, certainly there should be one player out of every 8 that is white toxic aggro. But overall, I find it really hard to give people 10 poison in this format. Usually, if you do it, they're at 3 life anyway. And that I find that mostly I like toxic mid-range because the corrupted cards can be pretty good and it's pretty easy to get someone to 3. But I don't really love the white toxic aggro strategy. I'll draft it if I'm the only one in the pod and I can feel like I can get 4 Crawling Choruses because nobody else is going to take them. But I think that's not an archetype that really even supports 2 players particularly well.
Really, I think with between green white and black white, you can get 2 players going. Can't you?
With black white, I agree there should be probably a green white and a black white toxic player in each pod, but the green white's the only one that should be focused aggro, in my opinion. When I'm black white, I'm interested in corrupting them so I can get max value out of all the corrupted cards. I'm not really interested in giving them 10 poison.
Yeah, the green white player's counting to 10, the black white player's counting to 3. But if they're both trying to count to 10, they're going to overlap a little too much on the cards they both want.
If you are trying to count to 3, you want Crawling Chorus?
Oh yeah,
you'll play it, but it's not an important card to get multiples of. You know what I mean?
No, it's not like the best card ever, but it's definitely a card you put in your deck.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm cutting Crawling Chorus from my black white count to 3 version. I'm just saying it's not important. It's just in that deck.
Leonin Lightbringer. That's the 3/2 for 2 and a white with Ward 2, and it gets +1/+1 as long as it's equipped.
It's not a good card. It looks like a serviceable 3 for equipment, but the thing is, you have the 3 mana 2/3 that's much better at 3-drop already. So I find it's if I don't have a lot of 3-drops in my red white deck, I might play it. If I do, I won't. It's not a good card overall.
What about Testament Bearer? That's the 3 and a black 4/1 that when it dies, you get a card.
It's not a great card, but I think this card's better than it looks because I generally find my black decks to be not very aggressive unless I'm heavy red with a few black cards. I find black in this format goes well with green and white to be corrupted mid-range value decks, and goes well with blue and to be a blue-black control deck. And in all of those strategies, I'm pretty happy to throw out a top-heavy blocker that's going to draw a card. Even if I trade it with the 3-drop, I'm down a mana, but I'm up a card. That's a pretty good exchange for a deck looking to play long games. So I actually kind of like that card. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's a playable 4 for non-aggressive strategies.
Do you like that card, Luis?
It's gone up in my estimation. I started, it was funny because I started by thinking the card would be pretty good. The format seemed really fast and a 4/1 didn't seem like a great stat line, so I stopped playing it for as much as I did. But then as I played more, I actually started to value it more. And there's just some matchups yes, it gets embarrassed a bit by Crawling Chorus. You're not down a card still, but it feels pretty bad when your 4-drop doesn't interact well with their 1.
Yeah.
But, or a 2/2 first strike, right? Duelist of Deep Faith, that sort of thing. But when you play against some of these green decks and you cast this and they have an Oil Gorger Troll, you got kind of the same card, but for less mana.
Yeah.
And
totally.
It can be really strong. So I obviously don't want to first pick the card, but I do like the card. And generally, I've had my controlling black decks, which is not to say all of them, but a lot of them do want the card.
Yeah. The next card up, by the way, is one that it kind of cleanly embarrasses. It's Lattice Blade Mantis. That's the 3 and a green 4/3 that can become a 5/4. It just kind of clowns that card.
Yeah, that's exactly been my experience. If you're heavy red aggro, you're not going to play the 4/1. But if you're, a grindy, corrupt green-black mid-range or white-black mid-range or blue-black control, happy, not great, but serviceable 4. And obviously the next card up, like you said, is good green aggro card. not an it's the opposite of what we just said. It's not an exciting card. You might play it, but it's not an exciting card if you're like green black corrupted mid range. But if you're like red green aggro or something, then you're very happy to have the four mana 5/4.
This might be the format that I've played this card the least in that it's been printed. It's Terramorphic Expanse.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 2-color format. You're not looking to splash. I don't mind playing it 1 to 2 tap lands in 2-color decks, but it's not important. Like I think that card is only providing a substantial amount of value for you if you're 3 colors, if you're splashing.
And I almost never am. And I'm very sensitive to tap lands in this particular format, where I was playing 2 to 3 at the beginning, and now I'm playing between 0 and 1. You know, like I'll maybe play 1, but I'm looking for excuses not to at this point.
So if you're aggro, completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. For more of the mid-range and control strategies, I think you might want to try upping the land count a little bit, because like obviously not for Terramorphic Expanses, you would just flood out. But I tweeted about this early once I started drafting these defensive strategies. Basically, like let's say you can get like 3 or 4 copies of like the tap lands that sack to draw.
The spheres.
So so like you know how like with tap lands, it's like exponentially punishing, right? Because like if you can play one on turn 1, that might not cost you anything. Even if you don't have it on turn 1, there's probably one turn over turn 2 through 5 where you could put it in play without it punishing you, because you couldn't spend all your mana anyway. But let's say you drew 2 of them. If you ever can't play a card for a turn, if you ever have to put a tap land in play on turn 4 and you just can't cast anything, you lose, right? Like that is extremely
disaster.
punishing.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you draw 2 in your hand, now you have to have 2 different turns where you can put one in play and still cast a spell. And sometimes that's not the case, and you're destroyed. So they have very like kind of exponentially punishing. Like if you draw 1, it's usually not punishing at all. If you draw 2, it's very punishing. If you draw 3, you might just lose a game outright or something like that, right? So what I do, since these particular sack lands help mitigate flood really well, and making your land drops is really valuable for defensive strategies. If I'm aggro, I'm playing like 1 tap land in my deck. You can probably play it turn 1 or 2 or whatever, but like not turn 2, ideally you cast a 2-drop, but like you can play it at some point, like turn 3 with a 2-drop or turn 1 or whatever. And so I don't mind playing 1 copy, 16 lands, whatever. But if I'm a controller mid-ranging strategy and I have 3 or 4 of those, I want to play them. I just up my land count by 1 or 2 because I have 3 or 4 lands that stack to draw a card. So I'm not going to flood. You know, I'm just going to make sure. And that what that really does is it makes it so you never get punished because you have more lands in your hand. So you're able to play on-tap lands when you need to because you have an on-tap land in your hand. Now, of course, you also need to play your cards on early turns. So, you know, you can't, if you draw like 5 lands and you don't have a 2 or 3 mana card to play, you're going to lose. So if you do that, if you play 17 or 18, let's say the example of this would be like for a blue black control, I might play 18 lands with like 3 or 4 tap lands. You want to be cutting top end, not bottom end, because it's really important that you still spend your 2 mana on turn 2, 3 mana on turn 3, 4 mana on turn 4, and, you know, don't fall behind. And then in the late game, your deck's still going to be more powerful than aggro, even if you cut 1 5-drop. So then you can sack those lands to get more spells and go on to win with your late game and your proliferate and whatever. So like if you do what I'm saying, which is like up your land count by 1 because you have 3 or 4 of those sack lands in a control deck, you generally don't want to lower your 2 or 3 mana cards. You want to cut like a 5-drop or a 4-drop.
Which is counterintuitive, right? Most people would say, well, I got more lands, I can play more expensive cards or lean in that direction. That's good.
That's why I wanted to go on that mini rant, because
that's good.
I feel like a lot of the reason the other people aren't winning with the blue control is because of some of these small things. There's a few other things that I think are really important that we'll probably get to talk about. Like, stuff like that, where like when you're a control deck, you can't have cards that don't block. You can't have things like that. So like if you do some of the small things wrong, it's really punishing.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that.
I just do want to point out that Gataxian Raptors are really ridiculous common. Like it's a 3 mana 4 toughness flyer that attacks for 4 like, consistently.
Yeah,
that is insane.
It's an absurd card.
And the ability to pump to a 2/3 is really valuable because if the opponent has 2 2/2s out, they can't attack and hit you for 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Like if that card did not exist, the blue controlling strategies I like would not exist either. Like that is the marquee blue common that you're building around basically.
Mirror Custodian. This is the 3 mana 2/3 that lets you scry 2 and lets them scry 1.
That card is horrible. And
I hate
never
that.
Play it.
Yeah. Last common is Molten Rebuke. That's the 4 and a red sorcery. It does you can choose both of these if applicable, but it does 5 damage to a creature, a planeswalker, and you can destroy an equipment.
That's a card I don't want to put in my main, and in best of 1, I'm never playing, but I think is a good sideboard card in best of 3. There's some
you never played in best of 1, huh?
5 mana for that. I mean, you already have Furnace Strider at 5, which is much better. You're not looking to have many 5 mana cards in your 16 land aggro decks. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to have no 5 mana cards in my 16 land red decks.
Okay.
And if I'm going to play 1 or 2, it's going to be a Furnace Strider. Like,
I like the card a bit more than that. I found it to be decent.
Yeah. I
like it as I do like it as a sideboard card for best of 3, because if you see your opponent has good equipment, then you bring it in and get a 2-for-1.
Our uncommons. First one is Sheoldred's Edict. That's the 1 and a black instant. Choose one. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature token, or a planeswalker.
Edicts are like that are pretty much never good because your opponent's sacking their worst creature, not their best creature. But since it's an instant, I don't hate it for controlling defensive strategies because it's a way you can just kill their 2-drop on 2 and move on, in the game and not fall behind. It's important. It's really important. Like if you trade even on turn 2, like if you imagine when you're mid-range corrupted or blue-black control or something, that you could just push a button and on turn 2, nothing would happen basically. Like their 2-drop would leave play and you'd be both down a card.
Yeah.
You'd be thrilled. That would increase your chance to win by like 5% or something probably. So this is a card that can accomplish that for you. So I play it in those decks. If you're aggro, I wouldn't use this card at all. When you're aggro, I mean, you're mostly interested in removing bigger and better blockers, not like their 2-drop or whatever. But if you're defensive, I'll play it as a way to just break even on turn 2, basically.
Yeah. Do you bump it up much for this ability to choose a non-token versus a token creature?
It helps a little bit. I mean, obviously, if they could sack Might, then the card would be totally unplayable. That's why they gave it that text, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't make it a great card. In general, like Edict, like they have to sack their biggest creature, their most expensive creature is good because it kills something good.
Yeah.
And they get to choose what to sack is bad because they just sack something weak. Like if you draw that card on turn 5 or 6 and you kill their 2-drop that wasn't doing anything, you've practically drawn a blank piece of cardboard. So, not a big fan, but it's a serviceable 2 for defensive and late game strategies, in my opinion. All
right. We've got 2 more uncommons in the rare, but before we get to them, I want to kind of, where are we here? We've got Gitaxian Raptor. We've got Crawling Chorus. There's Lattice Blade Mantis here.
We all know we set it up so Ben would get to first pick Gitaxian.
I mean, obviously I'm taking Raptor based on what we've seen so far, but so should everybody else. This isn't really about like again, I don't force blue. Like I don't believe in forcing anything. I think red is better than blue. But I think if you're taking Crawling Chorus over Raptor, pick one, pack one, you're making a big mistake.
What do you think, Luis?
Oh, I would take at this point. I would take Raptor over Crawling Chorus. For the reasons Ben has said. I'm not as high as Ben. I don't think. Well, on blue or otherwise, I don't think that. I
was going to say very few people are
the second best color, but I do think that Gitaxian Raptor is a very good Magic card, and I've come up on blue substantially, in part thanks to talking with Ben, but also just drafting the format more. And it's not quite as like you have to have a play on turn 1 as kind of, I thought it was a couple weeks ago.
And just for the record on that note, blue has a good defensive 1-drop. And so it's not like you have to fall behind on turn 1 when you're
What's
blue.
That,
like
the O3?
Yeah, Scry Forever.
Yeah,
it blocks the 1 and 2. It blocks the 1 and 2 drops, and then is a win con basically because you scry your lands to the bottom in the late game. So you have a 1-drop that blocks 1 and 2 drops well and provides card advantage in the late game for your blue control decks.
We may need to redefine what you think a win con is, but I hear what you're saying.
Something that generates value over the long run.
Yeah, that's most people consider win cons the thing that actually wins you the game rather than the thing that enables you to not get to that point.
Yeah, I see the thing that actually wins you the game, whether it's dealing the damage or drawing the cards, as the thing that produces the value that goes on to
fair.
Win the game.
That's totally fair. Vivisection Evangelist.
Which one is that?
That's the 3 black white 4/4 vigilance with corrupted. You get to blow up one of their creatures.
I mean, like I said, it's a really nice card. It's really easy to get them to 3. I mean, if I'm black white corrupted, it's first pickable, obviously. I'm not hoping to first pick it since it's a gold card. I would rather take like a 1-color card because it's not that strong. But it's clearly a good card for a black-white corrupted deck. But I'm taking Raptor over at pick one pack.
What about you, Luis? Because I'm slamming Evangelist.
I would Evangelist here. I think that black-white is quite good, and I would rather have a more powerful card first pick, especially since, yes, it's a gold card, but there are fewer different places you can end up in this draft format, enough so that I'm fine starting with one of the good color combinations as a gold card.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I do think it's better in black-white than like maybe Raptors in blue. But the problem is like splashing sucks in this format. So your basic, it's
agree with that.
A gold card. It's one deck that can play it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, but how much better is the question then, right? I mean,
not that much better. I mean, it's
I
a
think
great
it's
card,
like way better, but
it's a great card. But Raptor is a house. Like I said, Raptor is kind of the marquee common for blue, where like they basically can't attack into it. And it's also like kills them quickly.
I don't know. I feel like saying Raptors a marquee common for blue is like saying it's the best player on the Orlando Magic. It's like
no, I don't agree with that. I get the point, but I don't agree with that at all. Raptor doesn't suck at all. It's practically a 4/4 flyer for 3. I mean, that's only a little bit hyperbolic. Like there's a lot of proliferate and a lot of the threat of having the power. I mean, not a 4/4, I guess it would be a 2/3 or 3/2, but the threat of being able to turn it into a 2/3 and 3/2, you don't actually have to do it you don't have to spend the resource, the oil, because they can't attack. Because like what are they gonna do? Attack with 2/2/2, so charge you an oil counter.
No, it's solid. But I mean, if I went down the colors, right, like I could start naming cards from the other colors that, you know, are at least on par with that.
I mean, we should probably do it after the Crack-a-Pack, but I think like in context, if you accept, like if you start, I'm not saying you have to agree, but if you take the premise of the blue strategy is tier 1, not the best, like I said, I think red is better even, but if you accept the premise that if you draft the blue deck well, it's as competitive as all the other colors, it's tier 1, then I do not think common for common, you're going to find the other colors have as good a cards except for red.
Okay,
like, you know,
fair enough. Yeah, I mean that's the premise is the hill to climb there, of course. But yeah, that's worth it. We're talking about. Next one's another really good uncommon. It's Nimraiser Paladin. This is the 4 and a black 4/4 toxic 2. And at ETBs, you can get a creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard back to your hand.
Yeah, that one I would take over Raptor because it's as good or better, like as the 5 mana 4/4 black-white one, and it's one color, so you can play it with. And black can be paired with pretty much anything in this format. Black in this format, in my opinion, is actually one of the weaker colors, but it's a support color. It goes well with any of the other 4 colors. So, like, I'm definitely going to take the Nimraiser Paladin over the Raptor because I can play any of the 4 black decks and play this card, and it's good.
Luis, you on Nimraiser here?
Yeah, I would Nimraiser just over Evangelist.
I would too.
And over Raptor, as it were.
It's just asking less, yeah. Our rare is Melira, the Living Cure. This is the green-white 3/3 that messes with them putting poison on you and also can sacrifice or exile itself to protect another creature.
I mean, that card's fine. Obviously, from green-white, it's a 3rd pick or whatever. But, I mean, it's not even close. Like, for me, this pack, my first choice would be Nimraiser Paladin. My second choice would be Raptor. My third choice would be Evangelist. That might be my 4th choice. I might even take Chorus over it. Like it's only good in green-white, and it's not that good.
Yeah,
Luis,
I'm not,
Nimraiser Paladin.
I'm in for Nimraiser Paladin. I would not first pick Melira under most circumstances. Like it's not even a color combination I love. It is a draftable one, but it's not one that's worth committing that hard for it. It's not like the card does anything special.
Yeah, and it is the definition of a gold card.
It's very close to a Watch Wolf. Like you don't sack the card very often.
No, every time I've done it, it's just because they were going to kill it anyway. It's just like you know, it was like well, I guess
one infect instead of 2 once in a while or whatever.
Yeah,
it's cool, but it's not super relevant, especially when green-white is the aggro poison color of the format.
Right. So let's talk about that premise that you put forth there about blue-based control decks being tier 1. You know, from what we've seen in the format, that hasn't been the case, or at least it hasn't been generally accepted to be the case. But you seem to think that that's true. So what's your argument for it, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, first, you know, not that the results prove or don't prove anything, but like I said, in the actual Pro Tour, I drafted blue, green, and blue, black. I went 4-2, not making this up. Both my losses were to the Wanderer. I beat like all this red aggro decks I played with it and so on. Not kidding. One of my opponents even had 2 of the Wanderers. One had 1, one had 2.
This is just ludicrous. I lost.
They can go back and look this up. Round 3, round 1, round 4, and the first round, day 2, and they all had 3 Wanderers between them.
I at some point you're going to want to basically kind of detail what you think it means that the stats have blue losing by far the most of any color.
I'll go into that all right now. And also, I was just going to say in the Arena Open last weekend, I drafted blue red twice, and I went 7-2 for 1K.
Okay.
And so I think the reason the stats have blue so bad is because you can't mix bag it when you're control. You have to understand what you're doing. There's some counterintuitive choices that are really important. I think if people drafted it the way I was drafting it, with following these pick orders, like inside that archetype and prioritizing the things that you should and shouldn't do, I think that it would, I don't think it would be dominant. I don't think it's like some broken deck, but I think you'd be a favorite generally against the aggro decks, and you'd have a good strategy when it was open. And an example of that, here's a good example of that. If you guys were to look at the 2 blue common 5 drops, Quicksilver Fisher or something, the 4/3 flying draw card, and Melweb Strider, the 5/5 vehicle, right? How would you like rate those compared to each other across all formats?
I mean, I would prefer the flyer by like a large margin.
Yeah, I mean, definitely by a lot, right? Like day one, I started when we were drafting Monday night after the set came out. I'm looking at Melweb Strider. I'm going, this is unplayable, pass it. I'm looking at Quicksilver Fisher. I'm like, oh, this is a good 5 drop, right?
Yeah.
And it's the opposite. Like when you're a control deck, right? A 4/3 flying doesn't block well. It only has 3 toughness for 5 mana. You don't care about flying very much. It's cool. You can block opposing flyers, but you're trying to win through value and inevitability, not aggression. So flying's not worth a lot. 3 toughness is horrible. And you don't need your 5 drop to put you up a card. You need your 5 drop to stabilize the board and turn the game for you because you're the control valuing strategy. On the other hand, Melweb Strider, right? 5 toughness is a ton in this format. It dodges sorcery speed removal. So it's really hard for aggro decks to continue to attack profitably when you drop a Melweb Strider. And I had 2 copies of Melweb Strider in both of my decks in the Pro Tour. And if you're and none of Fisher, of course. And if you're drafting Fishers and putting those in your deck instead of Melweb Striders, that's going to sink your whole control strategy. Because on turn 5, you're going to play a creature that they can remove with cheaper removal or just attack right into with their pump spell or whatever. If you play a Melweb Strider, you're going to 2-for-1 them if they have a pump spell. They're going to be unable to attack if they don't. You're going to like dodge sorcery speed removal. It's just a whole different world. And this isn't like one of the best commons for the deck or anything. I'm just talking about the 5-drop slot. But like that right there is going to sink your win percent if you're drafting blue control and you're putting Quicksilver Fisher in your deck instead of Melweb Strider. There's tons of stuff like that. I mean, that's just a clear example, but you need to draft this deck like you're trying to beat aggro. So like I bet a lot of people when they do go into blue, they're thinking their control, they're going to take card drawing, for example. Whatever it's called, the 5-mana draw 3, that is not a playable magic card. That should never be in your deck ever. Like that's not a playable magic card. Right.
Yeah.
Your value, your way you win is through scrying from the O3 and proliferating for oil value and just having like overall bigger, better stuff. And this is an aggro format. Red is the best color. Let me be clear. Like it might be very controversial. I say blue is the second best color, but I'm not saying blue is the best color. Like red aggro, red is the deepest and best color. If you go common for common and you start matching up all of the colors, you will find the red cards are the best. Red has the most good commons. If I think we can do this, I don't know what you guys think are the second best color is. Remember, not to pair with red. We're talking about if it's going to be open and you're going to have like 12, 13, 15 cards of that color.
I guess white.
And then we can match up the commons. And like I said, if you just think, even if you draft blue defensively correctly, like the way I'm describing, you're still going to lose, then obviously you're going to think the cards are bad. But if you were to imagine that if you draft it the way I'm saying, you will get about the same win percent as any other tier 1 deck. Then when you start looking at these cards in context, I think you will find they're substantial. They look better than the white cards, let's say. And we can do that right now if you want to just like kind of think about it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Luis.
Well, I actually wanted to chime in one thing about stats here. So on the one hand, I don't find it to be a particularly compelling argument that you're the only person who knows how to draft blue and all the people drafting blue on 17 lands are just doing it wrong.
Well, I actually do think that's somewhat the case. Like I don't have to be the literal only one. It just has to be a firm minority, right? Like if, of the, let's say, whatever, I don't know the number. So let's just imagine there's 1,000 people creating these stats, right? If blue's not being drafted very much already, so that means what each person does is more meaningful. But of course, I'm not literally the only one who's drafting it correctly. But if only 10% of the people drafting blue are drafting it correctly, then that's going to tank blue's win percent, right? It's not that like, oh, there's 1,000 people and only I'm drafting it correctly. It's that most people aren't drafting it correctly. The ones who are the minority. So the stats get tanked.
Well, so I took a look at the stats for how each color pair did. I'm not counting splashes because I think, as you said, splashing is generally pretty bad. I don't think that you're going to do it very often. It shouldn't impact what we're talking about very much. And when looking at only the top users of 17 lands, so like the people with the highest ELOs or highest ratings, win percentage rather, I think is what they use, versus the all users, The blue pairs do go up by more each percentage than most of the other pairs. So like
relative to the others.
So the top users all across the board, of course, their win percentage goes up when compared to all users, right? Because they're the top users. But for example, Demir's win percentage goes up like 6.5% when a top user is playing versus the whole pool, whereas Gruel goes up something like 3 or 4%. Because I think that there's probably more ground to be gained there for those players because, like you said, it's tricky to figure out what's going on with blue and how you should be drafting it. I think that it's somewhere in the middle. I still disagree that blue is as good as you say it is or should be. And I don't know what percentage of the time you think you should draft blue, but if you think it's the second best color and it's deep, seems like you think it should be drafted fairly often.
Yeah, Sierkiewicz shared another stat today that I think also points in this direction, that people are like the top users on 17 lands are winning faster than they were in Bro, but they're losing slower. As in the games they lose are going longer. They're not getting run over. And the problem is, like I said, the less experienced, the masses, so on, are getting run over because they're drafting Quicksilver Fishers over Meltweb Striders, and they're drafting card drawing when they're blue and whatever. And that's what I said, I think that tanks the blue stats. Because again, it's not just me. It's just if 80% of users are going to make those picks, then their blue decks are going to do horrible. And so I think like Sierkiewicz's stat that he shared today, that also kind of shows this, that like you can extend games and win that way. You just have to be ready to do it. You have to, and the top users are doing that. They're losing on a later turn when they lose on average than they were in Bro. So they're not getting run over, whereas they're winning on a faster turn, on a shorter turn than they were in Bro. So they're running people over. So people are losing because they're not properly drafting to extend the game. They're getting run over. They're getting run over. The weaker players are getting run over of their own doing, and like the better players are able to extend the games.
How much of this do you think, Ben, is a metagame call of sorts? Right? It feels like what you're describing is sort of a situation where everybody in the room is scrambling after the same thing, right? They're all like, if you just play straight up like we did at the beginning of the format, you have like a reasonable creature curve. Let's say you kind of bring a mid-range deck to the fight and you start playing out your matches, you'll start realizing that people are pushing things lower, right? There's more 1-drops being played. They're looking for excuses to just do, like the first person to do 2 things in a turn often has a big advantage. Missing a beat in the first 1, 2, 3 turns of the game is very punishing. And so people started maximizing to not have that happen, right? They're like, I'm going to play 1-drops. I'm going to play every combat trick and get my hands on. And there's sort of a race to the bottom that starts to form. Do you feel that the archetype, the blue-based decks or the more controlling decks are just a reaction to the fact that everybody else is trying to go as low as possible?
That's a really complex question. It's a good one. It's really complicated. So like you have to be prepared to play defense early a lot. You have to drop the power level of your blue cards, right? You can't put stuff like Quicksilver Fisher and the 5-mana draw 3 in your deck. You have to play all things that block well the turn you play them and a lot of cheap cards, right? Mm-hmm. So that means if other people were doing that too, then you would have like what used to happen in Luis's drafts in North Cal, where you're putting the third 7-drop in your deck,
right? Because
that's the same concept, just the opposite of this. Everybody's trying to outpower each other because nobody's going low, right? Right. So then I would lose with my blue draft decks where I'm playing 2 and 3 copies of the 0-3 Scry and the 1/1 draw card when it dies and stuff, because the other people would have draw 3s in their deck and I'm playing 0-3 Scry, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure where the exact balance is. What I'm confident in is that blue has the tools to combat aggression and be a big favorite against it in this format.
Okay.
That's why it's a really good but complex question. If too many people were doing what I'm doing, then maybe what I'm doing would become a bad strategy because I would lose to them. Right. So it's hard for me to say. Like blue is deep enough that if everybody drafts it the way I'm talking about drafting it, it can definitely support 2 to 3 players per pod. But if they start trying to out card draw each other, then maybe they can no longer beat aggro. I can't comment on that because it hasn't been the case. In my experience, like I'm tabling Gitaxian Raptors and stuff like that, And like, I'm not.
But you will lose to the person who plays a bunch of Vivid Surgeon's Insights and casts a bunch of draw threes.
Right.
Yes,
right.
that's what I'm saying. Right. If there are people doing that, I'm going to lose to them, and then maybe my deck's no longer a good strategy. Now, nobody should be doing that because red is the deepest and best color. So this isn't like rock, paper, scissors. It's like there should be 4 to 5 red aggro players per pod because red is that deep and good and like busted in this format, right? So like, the other decks should be prepared to compete with that, not to outcompete the one other blue control deck in the pod, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, I think what I'm saying is a valid tier 1 strategy, but I agree if other people were playing vivisections, whatever, then they're going to beat me, and then my deck becomes a lot worse.
Yeah, this to me feels like, you know how some formats have like maybe an archetype that kind of ends up being, you know, it gets called the fun police, right? It's like a very good low curve aggro deck when everybody else is trying to do mid range or slower stuff. And if you run into it, you're like, ah, crap, you know, it's going to run me over. It feels like this format is that, right? And you've sort of flipped the table where you found the one stronghold of I can block, I can make this game go long, and I have the tools to actually do that. You're kind of the fun police going in the other direction, which I don't think I've ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the blue commons. Like, I think people really just aren't like processing this. Like, so you have a 1 mana 0/3 that generates card advantage. That's like a dream for control decks. Usually you have to pay 2 mana for that card.
Right.
Like, the fact that you can not fall behind because you can put out a blocker that can block 1 and 2 drops on turn 1 is excellent. And it's a serviceable card. Like in the late game, if you scry a single land to the bottom, that's practically draw a card. And like I said, there's plenty of good proliferate. It's really basically scry forever. At 2, you have 2 good blockers early that are serviceable in the late game. You have a 1/3 that turns into a 3/3 unblockable, blocks well early, fine win con or damage creature late. You have a 1/1 that draws a card. So it's not great early, but you can spend your mana and then get your card back later and impact the board for 2. And there's a lot of 1 toughness creatures you can block. For 3, you have literally flying moat of death. Like, I don't know how to, I don't know what
flying moat of death is nice.
We've already talked a lot about Raptor. I mean, it's just like incredible. Like,
you couldn't have given me that one before I was in the booth at the PT. Flying moat of death. Like, I would have used that.
And then you have a good effective 3 mana removal spell in Dose that generates proliferate value and kills something, right? And then for 5, you have a 5/5 that dodges sorcery speed removal, which is way bigger than all the aggro creatures. You know, the pump spells are +2/+2, +3/+1. You know, if they have that, they're getting 2 for 1 when you block with Melweb Strider. Like, you know, they're still, maybe those cards generate card advantage. Maybe it's a 1 for 1.5 because, you know, the draw card is a land 40% time, whatever. Point is, Melweb Strider blocks effectively against pump spells. So you have your 5-drop doesn't get beat by the pump spells. You're still killing their creature. Maybe their pump spell's not even good enough. If they have a 2/2 +2/2, still can't have attack into it. But even if it's +3/1, you're still trading, like you're still effective. You're killing their creature, their pump spell's gone, you're able to block. Like they're not eating your 5-drop with their 1-drop.
Right.
So you have a 5/5 that blocks well, dodges sorcery speed removal, a 3-mana card that's just incredible for these kind of strategies, 2 2-drops, so you're always hitting the board on turn 2, you're never falling behind, and a good 1-drop. Like that's 5 different commons that block well that are creatures.
I want to run a couple of commons and uncommons by you just to see where they fit in your mind into the archetypes that you're talking about. Experimental Augury.
Serviceable. I don't want to have like a ton of it because it doesn't impact the board, but the proliferate value is certainly worth the 2 mana. And like, I'm happy to play like 2 copies of it in my blue decks, but I don't want 4 because then you draw multiple copies of it and, you know.
And so that means that Prologue to Phyresis isn't on your list, right?
No, the only way you're playing that card is if you are trying to corrupt them. Like if you're blue-black and you have a lot of corrupted payoff.
And you just need to get things started.
Yeah. I know that a lot of players, when they hear the term control deck, they think counter spells. And even though that often isn't the case, I want to ask about Bring the Ending, the 1 and a blue counter target spell, unless they pay 2.
Same answer. If you're corrupting them, that's a good magic card. If you're not, it's not. Like counter on turn 2 or 3 for 2 mana is fine. They're not going to be able to pay 2, but you can't have it be a dead card in the late game. So if you expect that they're like going to be corrupted 90% of the time by turn 6, then that's a good common that I'll play. If they're not going to be corrupted, and to be clear, if they're going to be corrupted half the time, it's still unplayable. You can't have a card that works on turn 2 and 3 and is unplayable half the time in the late game.
Right.
But if they're going to be corrupted 90% of the time, then it's effective card at all points in the game. So then it's a fine card.
Card that meets some of the criteria that you've mentioned, but falls short of others, but has proven itself to be at least something to contend with in some of the archetypes, namely in blue-red is Ichor Synthesizer. That's the 2-mana 1/3 that can get bigger and unblockable and all that. Does that make the cut for your control deck?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll play any number of those in all of my decks.
Oh, okay.
That's just it. 3 toughness, blocks well early. It can block a 3/1, it can block a 2/2.
Real threat late.
Real threat late.
And it ends the game. Yeah.
And it's not hard to get to 4 because remember, you're not an aggro deck. You're not like, oh man, it's turn 4 and I can't attack. Like you don't care. But like by like turn 6 or 7, it's got 4 counters from playing non-creatures and proliferating. So it's just a card that blocks well on turn 2 and 3 and is a threat in the late game to end the game when you've stabilized.
What about Chrome Prowler?
Chrome Prowler is fine. So I basically view that as 3/2 gain 3 or whatever, right? Which if you're aggro, Chrome Prowler is excellent, right? Like if you're a tempo deck, like let's say you're the blue-white artifacts deck. That deck is pretty aggressive. It's got a 3-mana 4/4 scry 2 that can't block effectively, right? So like in blue-white artifacts, Chrome Prowler is excellent. That's a deck that's trying to win kind of through aggression and tempo. In my strategies here of blue-black, blue-red control, like it's medium because like it is a really aggressive format. There's nothing wrong with a 3-drop that trades with their 3-drops and gains 3, but it's not an exciting card. You know what I mean? Like it's like a serviceable 3 if you didn't get multiple Raptors is how I would describe it for that deck.
What about
for
cards?
Blue-white, you should be slamming it.
What about cards that have great potential for the late game, but don't meet the criteria that you mentioned about being able to effectively block the turn you play them? I'm thinking cards like Thrumming Bird or Trawler Drake, that come in and they're a little undersized or greatly undersized. Do you just have to ignore those? Yeah,
I'm not a fan of Thrumming Bird. It's good to get extra oil counters, but playing a 2-mana 1/1 to do it is not good. Trawler Drake is good despite what I just said, and it's just too good of a card is the reason.
Because you just need one counter and you're happy or whatever.
Well, with Proliferate, I mean, like literally, like you play it, you can't block on turn 3, but we're not playing Modern. Like you take the damage, you're at 15 or whatever. Then you untap and Mesmerizing does something, and it's a 3/3, and so you got a 3/3 flyer for 3, and then the next turn it's a 5/5 or whatever, 4/4. So the concept is there, and Thrumming Bird's not good because of it. But Trawler Drake is just such a good card that it's good despite the concept.
Okay. What about Tamiyo's Immobilizer? That's the 3 and a blue artifact that is kind of the icy manipulator for oil counters.
Yeah, that card is obviously much better in artifacts like the Chrome Prowler, but that card I found to be pretty effective just because with Proliferate, it's just basically 4-mana kill their best creature forever because that's so long, right? If you proliferate, as you're proliferating, you're often you're scrying cards at the bottom, you're adding counter, you're scrying more, you're experimental auguring, you're proliferating and seeing 3 cards, you're getting another card that might proliferate or draw cards or scry or whatever. So I find these things all kind of fuel each other, and you don't really run out of oil counters until it doesn't matter. You may run out eventually, but at that point, you've stabilized the board and you're hitting them with the 1 or 2 things you want to be hitting them with. I'm not saying it's some amazing card. In blue-white artifacts, that's an amazing card, Immobilizer, because again, you're trying to end games quickly, you're tapping blockers, In blue-black, blue-red, controlling strategies, I'll play it because I find it's basically 4-mana kill their best creature forever. I'm not excited by it,
What about pure card draw? Things like we talked about Vivid Surgeon's Insight. You said you didn't like, Tamiyo's Logbook, Distorted Curiosity, cards that just don't affect the board at all. Yeah. When you play them.
Vivisections and Logbook are unplayable. And the Distorted Curiosity is if they're going to be corrupted. If I have no ability to corrupt them, I'm not putting Divination in my deck. If I expect that I'll be able to play that for 1 mana, I'm blue-black and I'm good at corrupting them or something, then I'll play it because 1 mana is so cheap.
So where does you mentioned the 1-drop, but a lot of times when you think about decks like this, especially, truly dedicated control decks like how you're describing, where, one of the things that you look at the most is the defensive speed that it adds, right? The 1 or 2 mana plays that actually can trade or block effectively and buy you the time. One thing that ends up coming up later is you have a little bit of a conflict, right? On one hand, you might play what we call a traditional win condition, a card that costs, say, 6 or 7 mana, is very tough to kill and kind of can just win you the game in short order. That's fallen out of favor, generally speaking in recent years, because those can be answered, relatively easily for cards that tend to to give you inevitability with regards to card advantage or generating some type of advantage over time that are more difficult to pin down. Where does this deck fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, well, if you think about like the commons I was just saying that you can easily have multiples of in every draft. This is why I think this strategy is so good. Like, obviously you're hoping to still get like a couple uncommon or rares or whatever that are good like cards to win the game with, but you don't have to. Like, if you look at like all these good red and white like aggro strategies or whatever, their cards are pretty underpowered. They're just aggressive, right?
Yeah.
They're playing pump spells. They're playing 2-mana 3/1. They're playing,
I'm excited about Corrupted Chorus, and it's a 1-mana 1. Like anything with 2 toughness blocks it forever. Yeah.
Right, and Sawblade Scamp and the 2-mana Rebel Equipment. That's the 2-mana 3/1 I keep referring to, and it's like that with all the cards. They're not powerful cards. So when your 2-drops and 3-drops match up against theirs, and then in the late game, you get to scry your lands to the bottom. That's where the value comes from that makes you a favorite, right? Like, if my 1-drop's blocking your 1 or 2, we're 1-for-1 on cards. And then every time you draw a land, you get a land that you don't need. And I get to scry my lands to the bottom a lot of the time.
Right.
Then I just win because I'm up 2 or 3 cards, right? You don't have to do something incredible to win the game. Or if I stabilize like that, then I can just start attacking you with my 3/3 unblockable. That's not that slow a clock. I can attack you with my Meldweb Strider. That's a really fast clock, and still have it back to block. I can, attack you with my Raptor and hit you for 4 when I'm ready to do that. So you just literally get to stabilize with these cards that block extremely well at common, and then use those same cards to end the game. And it's not like red and white. It's not like Crawling Chorus and Blade Fist, whatever, 2-mana 3/1 Rebel, and so on, are stopping that from happening in the late game.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because it's kind of doing its own thing. It's not generating raw card advantage. It's not putting out some expensive, difficult to deal with bomb. It's actually just taking advantage of the fact that it can curate its draws better. And the other deck, like if you mentioned this earlier, but if you have one Gitaxian Raptor that is unanswered, that can hold back 3 1/1s or 3 2/2s even, right? So you're kind of, generating advantage through that as well.
Yeah, and like, you don't need a big advantage to beat these decks. You need to keep your life total up. Like, a lot of times they have the 4-mana card, Creatures Can't Block. If that card isn't dealing lethal, it's dealing nothing, right? Like, if they have 10 power in play and you're at 10, that wins the game. If they have, 10 power in play and you're at 18, that card's a mulligan, right? Like, it doesn't impact the board. And so, like, you just win by, like, kind of these same cards by making their aggression ineffective, by keeping your life total really high from the beginning. Like, you should not be stabilizing at 12 a lot. You should be stabilizing at 18 a lot of the time, because you have 2-2-drops that block extremely well, a 1-drop that blocks extremely well, a 3-drop that is flying Mode of Death. Like, you literally, you're not trying to turn the game on turn 5 or 6. You're matching their stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're matching their stuff and blocking from the beginning.
So it's funny. One of the discussions we had in our team meeting was, what would it take for you to go into blue? And like, the answers ranged from some people being like, I basically wouldn't draft blue unless I open like Blue Sun's Twilight or something like that. Some people think, well, if you get like a Gitaxian Raptor, 6th pick or the Voidwing hybrid, the blue-black uncommon, you get that 4th or something, they're more on board. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that like Martin liked blue-black more than most people, that sort of thing, Martin Juza. It sounds like your answer is, if there's a Gitaxian Raptor in my opening pack, I take that above a lot of other cards in the format.
Yeah, but Gitaxian Raptor is one of the best commons. I mean, it's a lot above the next best ones, it's like I said, it's the marquee blue common, right? Like, the next best blue commons for this strategy are way worse than it. They're fine, but like, if you look at the cards I was just naming, like, next is probably Mesmerizing Dose. It's nowhere near as exciting as Raptor. After that, you're talking about like synthesizers, and like, that's nowhere near as good as Dose and Raptor. Like, so it's basically Raptor's the only pull you into this blue strategy common. The others are all, fine, good. They block well, they generate advantage, but they're not Raptor level. How
do you balance the fact that people don't really like drafting blue? Like, do you see, like, obviously if you see a 6-pick Raptor, you think blue's open, but people's values are all over the place on some of the blue cards. So when you get a 10th pick Glistener Seer, the 03 for 1, or you get past other blue commons that you like a fair amount, 5th, 6th, 7th pick. How are you trying to figure out whether blue is open, or do you just kind of assume it's always open?
Yeah, I kind of assume it's always open unless that's not happening. Like, if that, like if I'm not seeing Raptor 4th pick, 5th pick, then I assume there might be a blue drafter to my right. If I'm not tabling that 03, then I assume there's blue drafters because somebody's taking them, right? So I'm not forcing blue. Like I draft like these black and green corrupted mid-range decks. I draft red aggro, but I'm willing to take Raptor very early because I think it's awesome. I'm not willing to take like Mesmerizing Dose and Synthesizer. Like if you're forcing something, right? You're taking Mesmerizing Dose or Synthesizer, to go blue, right? I'm not willing to do that. Like I'm taking basically anything that I think is better than those cards, starting with the premise that this is a tier 1 strategy. I'm taking anything for any other tier 1 strategy that I think is better over cards like Dose and Synthesizer, which I don't think are better than a lot of other commons, right?
Hexgold Slash or something along those lines.
I would take Hexgold Slash over Raptor, of course. Again, I'm not forcing this or something. In my opinion, Hexgold Slash is the best common. I'm taking it over everything.
Okay, well, what's the best common that you will take Raptor over?
That's a good one, Luis.
Yeah, that is a good one. So, when I start thinking about the best commons, I would definitely take Slash over Raptor. I would definitely take Vorak over Raptor.
You taking Volt Charge over Raptor? Or are you taking Raptor?
No, I'd probably take Volt Charge. Afflict with Affliction, I'd probably take over Raptor. That's the black removal. That's what it's called. I'm not the best with the names.
Anoint with Affliction, yeah.
Anoint with Affliction. Yeah, I take that over Raptor. I think the only black common I would take over Raptor is Anoint. I think for red, only the 2 removal spells. And honestly, Raptor and Volt Charge are pretty close, I think. So if I feel like, if I know blue's going to be underdrafted, like if the people around me have been talking about how they won't draft blue and stuff, I might take Raptor over Volt Charge. Still wouldn't take it over Hexblade Slash, but I think Hexblade Slash, Afflict with Affliction, and Vorak are better than Raptor. Don't think white has any commons that are better than Raptor. I wouldn't take Planar Disruption over it.
How about the other Raptor?
What's the other Raptor?
Flensing Raptor.
Oh, the 3-mana 2/2. Yeah, I'm not taking that over Raptor. I'm not taking 3-mana 2/2 flyer over the 3-mana 1/4 flyer. So I don't think white has any commons I would take over Raptor. I think black, red, and green have one that is better.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't tell if I think that if I like the format more because of this, because Ben has found a niche, that actually can combat and that people aren't fighting over, or if it's just another symptom of how skewed the format actually is.
Well, that's the natural balance that draft finds, right? Like if the format was less skewed in terms of aggression, then maybe this deck wouldn't work because your opponents would vivisection you or whatever, right?
Because it's crazy. Just to frame this, Ben, and I'm not putting. I like where you're going with this, so this isn't meant to be like a counter argument, but if we were to look at the games in hand win rate on 17 lands, we would find 9 white commons ranked higher than Gitaxian Raptor. Now, again, I'm not saying, and I rest my case. I'm saying you're saying there isn't one, and this says that there's 9. I
talk about this all the time, and so do the other data people. Even these win rates are deceptive. They mean something, but they're deceptive.
Definitely.
If you're putting Vivisection or even Quicksilver Fisher in your blue decks, the value of all the other blue cards goes down. They're not going to perform well. If you're not playing the 03 in your blue decks, I don't know how you're going to win with blue. And I would bet that if you looked at the number of the 1-mana 03 scries in blue decks on 17 lands, if they have that data, it would be quite low. I don't think most.
What is that card called again?
Glistener something maybe.
Glistener Seer.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I haven't looked at this, but
I can look it up right now.
If you look at the numbers played for blue, I would be look at the number of Quicksilver Fishers. So
the number seen of Glistener Seer is 261,940. So what's another one you want me to put it up against?
I don't know what that means. Number seen, that's just the number of how not early it's getting drafted, the amount of
No, this is just how many times it showed up in the 17 lands database.
Isn't every common just impacts an even amount, and then what is this?
Every common should be close enough to equal that I think you can just compare it. Oh no, that's not entirely true, because 17 lands users are going to see a lot more of these than they are of Shieldreds, because Shieldred gets pick one every time.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So this tells you how late a card is going. I'm not sure that this tells you how many are in people's blue decks.
Well, I can tell you how late they go too on the average last seen at. That's called Elsa. Let's see.
What I'm saying is, I'm not 100% on this, but what I'm saying is, if you can look at a stat, which I don't know if you can or can't, that shows you how in a blue deck, how many copies of this were played. Do they have that? Like, can you look at can you look at
shoot, I don't know.
There's 2.2 of these in each blue deck, or there's 0.6 of these in each blue deck.
I don't know. This is where we need Sirkovitz.
Here's my guess. Again, it's not that I am some secret genius, but that's not my argument. My argument is why the data doesn't tell the story is because people are playing more Quicksilver Fishers than Melweb Striders. And not that I'm the only one. It's that if you were to look at the 17 lands data and look at the blue decks, I bet they have something like 1 Quicksilver Fisher on average and 0 Melweb Striders on average. I bet they have 0.5 of the O3 in their decks instead of 2 or whatever. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So and that's going to sink the games in hand win rate of Synthesizer and Raptor and all of these other cards, right? So that's why I don't think the data tells this story correctly, because if you don't play the 1 mana O3, if you play Quicksilver Fisher over Melweb Strider, your blue cards are not going to work, basically.
Interesting. Yeah, and you don't have faith that the relatively large number of players banging away at this would come to similar conclusions that you have.
Again, it doesn't matter how large the number of players are because it's percentage based. If there's 10 million people drafting, or if there's 1,000 people drafting, if 80% of them are doing Quicksilver Fisher over Melweb Strider and not playing the O3, then it's
I'm
going
saying,
to produce
my point is that you're saying you don't have faith in whatever size the community is to realize these things and make those adjustments themselves.
So,
because we're throwing a big problem at a fairly large group of people, right?
When it comes to counterintuitive things,
mm-hmm.
you can't just push run on the program and get the correct data, because it doesn't matter how big the people are. People have to be doing
that's not entirely true.
You need critical mass, right? I mean, I'm just saying.
The point I want to make here is that the Magic community, especially the competitive limited community, is not like gigantic. If someone figures something out, then that will spread and propagate.
But it'll spread and populate through the people that they're connected to. Like, for example, the top 17 lands users, like you talked about earlier, right? Because those are all people that are probably checking what the other people are doing and consuming content and so on. It's not going to spread through every casual drafter.
No, but it will through a community like this. And it's not just about you getting on Messenger and saying, hey, Marshall, I think that Melweb Strider is actually better than this Fisher, and me going, oh, you're right. It's about me also playing cards, and then somebody plays Melweb Strider, and I go, I can never attack into that thing. What the hell, right? Maybe that card's better than I thought, and maybe I'll try to play it. This is the natural.
I'm not arguing there's no spread of information, but when something is counterintuitive, mm-hmm. It's not just going to spread like wildfire through casual drafters who pop on Arena and do 2 drafts a week.
No, we're talking about 17 lands users here, not casual drafters.
Well,
we're talking about people that took the time to actually install this program on their computer.
Yeah, I believe the data will show that top 17 lands users are extending games longer successfully, like mm-hmm. showed today. Their losses on average are on a later turn than their losses were in Bro.
No, I heard what you said. Yeah, I heard you. I'm saying, is that not happening?
Why doesn't Blue's win rate reflect that, though?
Because it's 10% of people or whatever. Like, if you have everybody, okay, let me explain this. There's a little more nuance, I guess. It's a good question. So the casual drafter, the 90% of people can draft red almost as proficiently as the top drafters because it's very intuitive. You want the cards you want, and the strategy you use works for them almost as well as it will work for the 10%, for the top drafters who have to do this counterintuitive. You don't have to do anything counterintuitive, right? So the win rates, which includes everybody, doesn't it shows it's good for red because these casual drafters can get their 46% win rate with red, right? Because all they have to do to get a 46% win rate, the 90% of people, they get their 46% out of red by drafting 2 mana 3/1, 4 mana creatures can't block, 3 mana, whatever, all the cards are good. They just draft the obvious red good cards, play in the obvious way, and they get a 46% win rate or whatever. When those same 90% of people draft blue, they get a 25% win rate or whatever, because they're not drafting Melweb Strider over Quicksilver Fisher. They're not putting the 1 mana O3 in their deck. So when you take the 90%, that's going to drown out the win percent gain from the 10% because we're looking at all of the data, right? So if 90% of the people are winning 25% of their matches with blue and 45% with red, and then 10% of people are winning 55% with both blue and red, then blue's going to end up with a much lower total win rate than red is.
What do you think the win rate breakdown should be? Like, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of ordering. Like, you think that the red decks should win the most, probably. Like, red overall, you'd expect most of the red color pairs to win the most.
So it's a really complicated question too, because it depends on how balanced things are and all of that, right? Like, in theory, everything wins the same because the same number of people don't play each color in a pod, right? If draft finds its perfect like Nash equilibrium or whatever, what ends up happening in this format is you have something like 4 red players per pod, 2.5 blue players per pod, 2.5 white players per pod, 2 black players per pod, like, I don't know, 3 green players per pod, whatever. Like, you get the point. So once you hit the correct number of players per pod for each color, then everything would win the same. And so like red will have a higher win rate if it's being underdrafted and a lower win rate if it's being overdrafted. Blue will have a higher win rate if it's being underdrafted and a lower win rate if it's being underdrafted. So you can't really say, this is what I've always said, like that draft finds a natural balance, but it doesn't find a perfect balance. So like, you can't really say like what's the best color. Like, you can say what's the deepest color, like we talked about. Like, that's when I say blue is the second best color. What I mean is it's the color that I think will perform the best when you have like 13 blue cards in your deck on average. It has like the most commons I want to play instead of like after red before. Like if you look at the colors in terms of how many of their commons do I want to play, red is 1, blue is 2, green is 3, white is 4, and black is 5 for me. But like, there isn't really such thing as a best color, because if it's a deeper color, more people should draft it. And then the win rate should find equilibrium.
Yeah, I think that doesn't quite line up though, because if that table that you described where each color sort of gets distributed according to how it should be, that does not mean that each archetype will win the same amount though, right?
Well, there's a distribution where that should happen, right? Like, if I let's say like
no, because there's only 5 colors and people have to draft 2 of them. Like, there's constraints that are sort of artificially placed on it.
Yeah,
if it was just every card had a number on it and color didn't matter, then yes, that would happen naturally, but that's not the case.
Yeah, but like, so red is deeper and deeper, let's say, right? So that means more people should play it, and then their decks are worse on average because the ones that produce the most win rate you get less of, right? Like, if 6 people play red, then you get to average 1.5 toxic slashes in your deck. If 4 people play red, you get to have 2 toxic slashes in your deck. So if the most win rate is attached to toxic slash, then the red decks perform worse as more people draft them. So like,
of course,
what should happen in a perfect sim or whatever would be the number of people that would draft red would be whatever amount makes it exactly like break even before it starts becoming not break even.
The problem just comes in
if it dropped below break even, less people would draft it.
The problem just comes in that it doesn't necessarily divide evenly into the number if each player at the table needs 2 colors and there's only 8 players. Like, if you make it more granular, like on a card by card basis, you could probably get to that point, but not when it's as clumsy as 2 color pairs.
Well, sure. In every pod, if you have to draft 2 color pairs, there's going to be a color that its perfect break even would be 2.6 drafters.
Sure.
And and that's the point. If you're trying to figure out whether it's only 2, in which case that color is going to perform above break even, or if it's 3, in which case that color is going to perform below break even. So if the actual break even was 2.6 for blue, let's say in this format, if you can be one of 2 blue drafters, you're going to be advantaged against the red decks. And if you're going to be one of 3 blue drafters, you're going to be disadvantaged against the red decks.
And another way to describe it would be, what if we took the 5 colors and one of them was significantly worse than the others? And I mean, 15% as good as the next one or whatever, where they're basically unplayable. Those cards are going to end up in somebody's pile, and those cards are going to end up getting played because everybody needs to find enough, cards to play. You can't just axe, 20% of the card pool and still have people with 2 colors or playable decks or enough playables. That reveals the fact that it will not be equally distributed.
Right, but so let's imagine you have a color I don't know, like black is the worst in my opinion in this format. Let's say like where it has like a couple playable commons, right? Like the best black common is 2 mana destroy creature. That's a good card. The second best black common is what, 3 mana 3/2 or something. Like black is terrible in my opinion in this format. Right. So let's say it should only support. Let's say its break even would be 1 per pod. If it has 2 per pod, then it's going to be an underdog against all the other colors. If it has hold on. Let's say its break even point was actually 0.7 per pod or whatever. If it has 1 per pod, it's going to be a favorite against other decks. No, sorry, hold on. I'm coming up with this on the fly here. Let's say its break even was 1.2 per pod. That's the number I need for the hypothetical.
Right, it can't be less than 1, I don't think.
It can't be less than 1. Right. Let's say its break even was 1.2 per pod. So if there's 1 person drafting it, they're going to be a favorite against all the other decks. And if there's 2 people drafting it, they're going to be a big underdog. 1.2, I think, is the right number for the hypothetical we're coming up with on the fly here. So let's say its break even is 1.2 per pod. So the 1 person per pod is still going to be a favorite against everybody else because they get to have, like, on average, 3 afflict with affliction, whatever that card's called, and 3 of the 3 mana 3/2 and 3 of the third best black common. And remember, if there's only 1 person drafting that, there's probably like 5 drafting black and 3 drafting green and blue. So red. So you're only going to get to have, like, when you're one of 5 red players, you're only going to have less than 1 or whatever Hexblade Slash and less than 1 2 mana 3/1 or whatever. You get the point. Chimney Rabble, we haven't talked about, is probably the second best red common or third after Volt Charge. But whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, there is this balance. You're right that in draft, you're drafting a whole color. You're not drafting 0.5 of a color. So the way it actually plays out in practice is a color would be even at X, like 1.5 players. And then what you're trying to do is be in that color if you're the only one, so it's better than even. And you're trying to not be in that color if there's 2 people, because then it would be worse than break even. But it does work like that, where it finds that equilibrium. I mean, I'm not saying each draft successfully finds it, but I'm saying on a theoretical level, there's a number of people per draft, which may be 1.5, not 1 or 2, where the color would be break even. And then if it's underdrafted, on average, it will perform better than break even because you will get the cards that have the highest win rate in those colors more than you would if it was at its break even.
Of course. Yeah.
If it's overdrafted, it will perform worse because you will get the cards that have the most win rate less often than you would if it's being overdrafted.
How many blue drafters do you think, what do you think blue's number is at the table?
Between 2 and 3, probably. I think if I can be one of 2 blue drafters, I think blue will perform above 50% against red. If I'm one of 3 blue drafters, I think it will perform below 50% against red.
And do you think blue's being underdrafted right now or overdrafted?
Probably underdrafted. I don't know if I've changed that, by tweeting about the Pro Tour and the Arena Opens and stuff. Again, definitely, like we talked about, information spreads in the connected competitive community pretty well. But it doesn't spread among the mass community very well. There's a lot of people. We have to remember, we interact with everybody. It's not just top pros or whatever, right? Like, we interact with the competitive community. Yeah. So we see them getting the information. But what percentage of people on Arena do less than 2 drafts a week, consume less than 2 hours of Magic content?
The vast majority. Yeah.
The vast majority. Right.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying, the data will be corrupted by them because that's 90% of users or whatever. So,
okay, well, set those users aside. Here's a question I have to ask. Looking at just the top users, so this is the highest rated players on 17 lands, which already selects towards high rated people. Blue still performs quite poorly among those players.
I mean, how poorly? And even among those players, how many of them do you think are drafting Melt Web Strider over Quicksilver Fisher?
So
is there data that shows that?
The worst color pair is Golgari in terms of win rate, with 54.5%. And these are people whose win percentage is close to like 59% kind of base, or 58% base, something along those lines. But then after that, it's Dimir, and then Izzet, before hitting Rakdos, which is another color pair which typically hasn't done well, and then Azorius, then Rakdos. So the next 4 are all the blue color pairs.
Firstly, There's only 10 color pairs. So
Yeah.
having 8 and 9 does not just mean you're an unplayable color, right? If you don't have 10, 6, and 5 or whatever, that's not like egregious. But secondly, like even of these top users, like is there a way to look at how many of the O3 are in their deck, how many Quicksilver Fishers are in their deck, how many Metal Web Striders are in their deck?
Yes,
can we
you
look
can
at
look
that?
at, you can. Yeah, that's that. Remember when we had Sirkovitz on, Luis, and he gave us that. I don't know if it's out for this set yet, but there's a visual
we're going
way
to have some follow-ups with Sirkovitz after this, don't worry.
There's a visual way to represent that, Ben, that's really cool. I'll send it to you when I get it, but yeah.
Listen, I don't know all of these numbers. I could be wrong. I could definitely be proven
Totally.
wrong.
I'm not asking you to defend these numbers because it's kind of unclear what they all mean. But
that's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is even if you pull up the top users on 17 lands, and then you look up the number of Quicksilver Fishers in their deck versus the number of Metal Web Striders in their deck, I would bet that the number of Quicksilver Fishers will be substantially higher.
So part of this, though, is these are people who are good at Magic, right? And they're good at drafting. In general, they have a high win percentage. If they're losing with these things, they will, to some degree, stop doing them. And as a result, I mean, Boros has, more, it has like about 6 times as many people draft Boros than draft Simic at this point. But that still means the people drafting Simic are not winning. Like the people who are left drafting it, which is a smaller sample size, are still not winning. So here's the thing. I believe you, Ben, that this is an effective strategy for you and is an effective strategy in general. I'm going to spend some time this week trying to draft it more. But I think blue currently right now is way more likely to be underdrafted than overdrafted or even drafted at like the right levels. I think in general, because this is harder to find, if you're drafting blue will be more open than it kind of should be in terms of equilibrium. I think that it's probably less good than what you're stating, because I think these people are people who would figure that out, especially if it's underdrafted, and they would be able to win more with that.
Well, let me add something. Like, I think that also second best color or number of people that are going to play it all, I think this might be coming off kind of misrepresenting how good I think it is or things like that. Red is the best by a lot. It's not a high bar to be the second best. It like if you look at the colors in this format, like if you just go common by common, how many commons you want to put in your deck from each color, red is very deep and just very good, right? But
very deep and very good, yes.
But if you start comparing, so red should have maybe 5 players per pot or something like that, right?
Yes.
So if it's 2 color combinations,
4.
that leaves 11 for the other 4 colors, right? So that's, less than 3 each. So it's not like blue is way underdrafted right now. No, it's like, there's probably on average 2 to 3 blue players per pod, and there probably should be 2 to 3 blue players per pod.
My guess is there's less than that.
I mean, my guess is it's probably closer to 2, and the break evens between 2 and 3.
I would believe that it's like 1.8 at this point.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's data you can just pull up.
Yeah. I don't know.
So by the way,
but the point I'm trying to make is it's not way underdrafted. It's not like it's supposed to be 2.4 according to my hypothesis, and it's actually 0.5 or something. It's supposed to be between 2 and 3, and it's probably like 2.
Okay, Ben, I have that thing I was talking about. It's called Archetypist. This is something that we looked at, and I'll send this to you, by the way, so you can play around with it, because I think you'll really like it. But let's just do a quick. So what this does is it grabs a plot of the 1,000 recent best of one draft decks on Phyrexia All Will Be One on Magic Arena. So this is using 17 lands data. And what it does is you can pick an archetype. So do you want to do blue, black, blue, red? Like what is there, you can just pick which one you want. What's your favorite of the blue archetypes? Blue, red, blue, black?
Well, I think blue, red would be probably the best, but I think blue, black is probably the one that
the more controlling one. Okay.
Yeah, more prototypical.
And then what it does is it shows you a plot graph. And we did this on the podcast before, so our listeners will have seen it, but I'll put a link again in the show notes to it. And what you can do is you can start at, say, 50%. Decks above 50% win rate are highlighted. And what you see is there's a lot of plots because 50% is a fairly low bar. But as you work your way up, what you'll see is that there will be groupings of dots. And those are grouped by like cards, similar cards. When the cards overlap with each other, then you'll see a group of dots over here on the side and then another one over here. And this can help you differentiate what is working within a 2-color archetype, because these are cards that don't share. So what you can do is you can physically put a border around those decks, and that turns it into a cluster. So I just did that on what is the biggest cluster for blue black at the 58% or up win rate, where things start to kind of get a little bit more clustered. And this says, this grabbed 28 decks. And what it does is it breaks down the average number of that card in that cluster. And then it also compares it versus the average number in that color pair in general.
Okay.
So for example, the blue black one has Pestilent Siphoner at 1.4 copies for this cluster that I grabbed, where the average number is about half of that. So this is obviously the poison version, right? The next card is Prologue to Phyresis and then Whisper of the Dross. So we know what that cluster is. Now,
unfortunately, that's a different deck. I mean, that's fine.
And that's fine. But there's other clusters, so I'm grabbing a different cluster. So this one is also a Pestilent Siphoner build, it looks like. But let me look over here. So this one is the number one card is Mesmerizing Dose at 1.4, then Experimental Augury, then Anoint with Affliction, then Ichor Synthesizer, Glistener Seer, so there's your boy, Malcator's Watcher, Prologue, Gitaxian Raptor, Voidwing Hybrid, which shows up obviously a lot more here in this version, but whatever. Meldweb Curator is the next card. And the card that's not on this list at all is the Fisher. So here's your control deck over here.
Yeah, to be clear, Curator's the 3/4, also good in this archetype, and probably better than Strider. The only reason I use the Strider as an example is not because it's some great card, because people see it as totally unplayable and it's a serviceable 5, and Quicksilver Fisher people see as a serviceable 5 and it's totally unplayable. But yes, Curator and Strider are both cards that you want in your control blue decks, of course, and Quicksilver Fisher is not. So anyways, this cluster definitely sounds like what I'm drafting. It sounds like a blue-black control deck, not a poison them deck.
Yeah. And so you can go through and look at what people are winning with and what win rate they're winning with within those clusters. And again, I'll send that to you. This is a way, I think the best use of this tool is to understand that within a 2-color pair that there may be archetypes that work that value different cards differently, but we can, look at the type of deck that you're drafting.
Okay, so looking at that cluster, because again, it sounds like those people are getting it right, and starting with the premise that I'm right or whatever, that they're finding the same thing. They're not great premise to start, right? They're well, I mean, we're exploring that path. We're not saying it's definitely the case. Right?
For what it's worth, I think you're a lot more right than like the current state of discourse is on how good or bad blue is. So I'm trying to probe the limits of that, of course.
No, I know. I appreciate it. I mean, listen, a good conversation always involves pushback and devil's advocating, and I'm not. I don't take it personally. I think it's, you want to have discussion, you want to explore your ideas, you want to defend your position, right? Like that's how everybody learns.
No, I think everyone knows that you like to be a devil's advocate. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
but anyways, what I was going to say to Marshall was that cluster sounds like a pretty accurate representation of what I'm drafting, right? Like they're playing the 0-3, they're playing the 3/4, they're not playing Quicksilver Fisher. So I'm down. So how is that cluster's win rate like compared to like blue in general? Like, is it those people seem like they're drafting blue black the way I would draft blue black.
So the win rate of this cluster, but again, this is where it starts to get, so it's 20 decks total.
Okay, right? So it's not really a sample size at all, right? It's 20
right.
decks.
So
like
that's the thing is it, right. And the problem is that it's because it's blue. there's not as many of these total decks.
7 times as many people draft Boros than Simic or whatever.
Right. Like if I look at, let's say green red, I can start to find, much bigger chunks a lot easier, especially as
I'm not looking at what you're looking at. So like that is, like I said, the deck I'm drafting, and blue black is probably the most prototypical version of it. Does it seem to be working for these people who are doing it the way I'm describing? They're playing the 0-3, they're playing the 3/4, they're not playing the 4/3 flyer. Like,
yeah, I mean they're at slightly higher than average win percent. It looks like 56%, which for 17 lands, remember the average is like 53, 54, 52, somewhere in that range. Yeah, so I mean, but and there's 2 trophy winners out of the 20.
Average. They're winning more with this deck than they do on average with across the format.
Yes. That is correct.
And I mean, you just named a bunch of cards that you can get 7th pick or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, I think this backs
imply,
up what you're saying. That
would imply that what I'm saying is accurate, because
correct.
You can get a 2, 3, 4% higher win rate getting cards that are 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th pick all the time in drafts.
That's
according
right.
to this. It's only 20 decks. It's not a good data size, obviously.
Right. But this is a data point in your direction for sure. Yeah. And if they were able to go like super deep with this, and instead of the last 1,000 drafts, they did it the last 100,000, then we could probably tease out the difference on the Meldweb Striders and stuff like that. But, with only 20 of that particular style of archetype, where, because when I did the other one, there's over 30 of the poison version, right? Which is a different deck entirely.
And a good deck, by the way.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with blue-black poison if you get all of those cards. Like,
no, I know some of the I know some of the Pro Tour. I know some of the guys on your team, right, Luis, like the blue-black deck when it was open. The poison version.
Yeah, there was some back and forth as to whether it was better to be poison or control, and those were just very much distinct decks.
Yeah,
but they had a willingness to draft either of them.
Yeah, okay. I totally have. I'm with them. Like, I think that they're very distinct decks that want very different cards, and they're both good when they're open. Like, they're both blue strategies that you should be willing to do if it's available.
Okay, I got just one more question for you, Ben. This is a broader strokes question, but I think that you're very well suited to answer it. This is draft formats seem a lot different than they were 10 years ago, and card quality and speed have increased. How has this changed drafting the hard way?
Card quality has increased, definitely true. The other premise is formats are faster. Speed has increased. Yeah, probably true. How does that change how much you want to find the open lane? Like, be one of 2 drafters in a color that's equilibrium is 2.5 as opposed to being one of 3.
Do those affect that at all?
So speed shouldn't. That doesn't seem to me like that affects how much you want to find an under or over drafted color. Mm-hmm. Card quality might. Nobody's asked me that before, so I'm trying to think about it now, like right as you're asking it.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing that we wrestle with on the podcast with regards to those changes are that, even the cards that we would now deem unplayable really aren't, right? They're just below par 3/2s for 3 or whatever, where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we talked about this, they were actually unplayable. Like, could not, like, they didn't affect the board.
I think I have a couple points that are relevant here. One, it's not about card quality as much as quantity, where when Ben first wrote Drafting the Hard Way, I remember because I was the editor, this was back when if you were in the wrong color, sometimes you wouldn't have enough playables, or your last playables would be much worse. Now, if everyone ends up with 30 playables every time, bit of an exaggeration, but if you can get the colors wrong and still end up with enough playables, there's less punishment for being in the wrong colors. And then the other factor is if there's rare bombs that are as ridiculous as the Wanderer, playing the Wanderer and a bunch of bad white cards or mediocre white cards because white wasn't open still might be better than being in the open colors if you don't have the Wanderer.
Because they at least have power and toughness. They at least affect the board. They're not really
less about overall card quality and more about the quality of the best cards, the delta between the best cards and the average card.
Right.
Yeah. So again, I haven't thought about this before you just asked it, but I think in terms of card quality and quantity, like Luis is talking about, what matters is how much win rate is gained from the best commons compared to the weaker ones, because there are more playable cards, like Luis said. So you're always, even if, let's say the break even for your color is 2.5, and what Drafting the Hard Way, quote unquote, does, and just for the record, I mean, I've said this plenty of times, but people took Drafting the Hard Way to be more prescriptive and less descriptive than it was meant to be. I wrote Drafting the Hard Way with the intent of describing what matters in draft and what you're trying to like accomplish, not how you to exploit that, basically. Mm-hmm. But because like I think the clarity people gained from that kind of got them to realize like, oh, like there's a lot of value in finding what's open, as opposed to just jamming what I already have. I think before that, I think jamming what you already have is kind of like a natural default.
Yes.
So if you don't understand what you're doing, you keep doing that. When you get the clarity of understanding what you're deciding between and what factors have value in a draft pick, that just naturally kind of move people towards staying open longer. I wasn't trying to say it's correct to stay open longer, though I do think certainly it was correct to stay open longer than most people were before 2013 or whatever. But anyways, back to the exact question. So I don't think speed matters at all for staying open, or more or less. For card quality and quantity, I could be totally wrong on this. Obviously, I came on somewhat prepared to defend blue, expecting that and so on. Like I said, this is not a question I've been asked before. But as far as that, I think what matters is the win rate, like difference. Like the EV of a Magic card is how much it increases or your chance to win the game, right? And I think, like, let's say you find an open color, the cost is you often have to drop an early card, right? You have to drop like your second pick or your second and fourth pick or something to go into this color that on break even would have 2.5 drafters and only has 2. So you get the gain is that you get to be one of 2 players in a color that should have 2.5 to break even. So you get more of its, Raptors and best commons, because it would break even if 2.5 people are taking them. There's only 2. The loss is you lose the picks you made that you drop. You lose the value of your second and fourth pick, or your third pick, or your second and third pick, or whatever. So I think with the card quality going up and also the quantity of good cards, playable cards going up, I agree with both those premises. What you want to measure is to really determine whether staying open longer has more value, roughly the same value, or less value than it did in 2013 when I wrote the article. What you'd really want to measure, I think, would be the win rate difference between the 6th best card, the 8th best common in those colors, and the first, and things like that.
Yeah.
Because you're usually dropping the best common in that color that you second picked in order to get to be in the underdrafted color. And so the value difference between those, like how much the win rate difference was between, let's say, the top 2 commons in a color and the 5th and 6th best commons in a color in 2013, and what the win rate difference between the top 2 commons in a color now versus the 5th and 6th best commons in those color. I think the answer to the question you asked me is somewhere in that. I don't know it
but I mean, it's not really, but it isn't a better way to conceptualize it that if you have to make an assumption that you're correct, that a color is open, right? If you want to introduce the fact that sometimes you're wrong, that makes it really difficult to conceptualize. But let's just say you have evidence, you're good at understanding when a color is open and seeing it. I mean, if you ditch one common, even if it's a very good one, for the potential to go down a road where you have, nearly or even 2 full packs of being open color, in the open color where you can pick up the best commons or get past good commons later or any cards later, that has to outweigh any one card, right?
That's why when I wrote Drafting the Hard Way, and I think people gained the clarity as to what the actual value, where the actual value lies, people started staying open longer because of what you just said.
Yeah.
But the question you're asking now isn't that. You're asking now, with cards having gone up in both quality and quantity of good cards, does that move you towards staying open even longer, or does that move you to stay open less longer?
Yeah.
So and the way what you just said is true, but I think the answer to that question, and I could be wrong, like I said, I haven't even
I'm saying you're trying to quantify it, but there is no card that could be good enough that you wouldn't take an open lane for 2 packs over 1 common, right?
Well, I don't want to get into what about this card, what about that card? Because again, it would just be kind of wildly misleading. It's more is it correct to drop 2 cards to find a color that's underdrafted by a half a seat? Sure. Is it correct to drop 3 cards to get to find a color that's underdrafted by a half a seat? Right. Sure. That's more the question you're asking.
That's where the meat is on whether you're going to make that decision.
And the specific question you asked me, which I think is a very good one, which I'm probably going to be thinking. Thank you to whoever asked you guys that, because I'm probably going to be thinking about this for the next month.
It was a really good question. Luis, do you know who asked that? Just to shout him out.
Yeah. I can find it while you guys are talking.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And to be clear, like I said, I'm not even going to speculate on the answer because I haven't thought about it before you just asked it. I'm speculating on how you would start to think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, right? For sure.
Connor, Treo MTG.
Thanks, Connor.
Question.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Excellent
So what I will speculate on is how we will start thinking about that, which I could be completely wrong on that too. Like I said, I'm thinking about it here live on this podcast. But that's what I think. I think the answer to the question of with there being more good cards per pack and the good cards and the cards that are playable being more impactful than they were 10 years ago. I think what you want. Does that mean there's more or less value in dropping early picks to find underdrafted colors? That's the question you're asking. And I think the answer to that, which I could be wrong about, but I think the answer to that lies in the delta between the power level of the top couple of cards then versus the, like, let's say later picks you would get then. Like if you looked at the top 2 commons in each color versus the 5th, 6th, 7th best common of each color. And the same thing now, the top 2, the win rate delta, how impactful the cards are between the top 2 in each common and the 5th, 6th, 7th in each common.
Yeah, I think this all, like I said at the start, comes down to just deltas more than anything else. Like,
I agree. That's what I'm saying. Obviously. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. Let's call it a show there, boys, because we've been going for quite a while here.
Oh, I actually have a short question for Ben S.
I don't think there's such thing, but go ahead.
This one, let's see, comes from Tron. So good start. Ben, given that we have 2/3 of the class 2013 Magic Hall of Fame class on the podcast, how would you rank the full Magic 2013 Hall of Fame inductees?
I mean, rank in what?
The question was power rankings.
I mean, like in tight technical skill, I think it's you 1, Huey 2, me 3. I don't know. Well, what are they asking? I mean, what is the context? Like,
what about personality? Personality.
We haven't.
Power mean? Inability. In who would eat out of a dumpster first? You 1, me 2, you eat 3rd, probably.
Well, I agree with that. Drafting skill.
Hold on a minute. No. Ben wins for eating out of a dumpster first.
No way. If
yes,
there was a dumpster and we were both hungry,
Ben goes to Subway multiple times a week.
Yeah, he already almost eats out of a dumpster.
Subway's great.
Oh, is that because they have fresh baked bread? Is that
fresh baked bread and vegetables that are not rotten? You don't remember that was my ringing endorsement of it? That's because I was saying Subway is edible, so obviously people took that to mean me saying Subway is the greatest restaurant of all time. Because why wouldn't they?
Vegetables that are not rotten is a nice tagline for a restaurant.
That's what I actually said at that dinner when I was defending Subway.
That's great.
It's true.
You're a real salesman, Ben.
It puts into question what you eat when you're not eating at Subway.
There's a lot to Magic. People have a lot of different skills and different abilities. But I've similar to what we were talking about with colors and cards and stuff. I like to understand how to get the most out of everything. I'm not that worried about some kind of aggregate ranking. I don't think it's that useful. But I have no problem with saying I think I'm the 3rd best player of my Hall of Fame class of 3. And of course, I also have no problem saying Luis is better than Yui. I think if you look at my Hall of Fame class in tight technical skill, I think you have number 1 LSV, number 2 Huey, number 3 me. And I mean, that's not an insult or knock. It's kind of like when we used to do house rankings in the old CFB testing house and people would get mad if they were put last or next to last. And the list of people are all 5 Pro Tour top 8s and in the Hall of Fame and stuff. I got a good bit of a good brag for Team CFB, which is that of our original members, basically once we first became a group, it was something like 11 of the 13 of us made the Hall of Fame. Yeah, it is not a knock to be 12th of that 13 in the way that it is not a knock to be 3rd of 3 in my Hall of Fame class.
Right.
I'm below the 3rd and 12th best Magic player of all time because I'm, the 18th or whatever. That's not an insult. That's not offensive or whatever. Luis just asked that question because he wanted to hear himself get complimented a bunch on this podcast.
Well, to be fair, there are parts there which would I think rank me, first. But there's also I'm last in many of those rankings. There's some good rankings that split all of us. All of us have our various strengths.
Yeah. Well, you could ask about very different specific things. Obviously, both of us have kind of taken a step back from the Pro Tour being our top focus, winning matches in the Pro Tour being our top focus for a very long time. I remember at some point, I think in 2013, when up to that point, it was both of our top focus, let's say, for the most part. They put up, speaking of good, this is good data manipulation and deceptive data, they put up the win rate by format and total win rate in our for our Pro Tour history or whatever. And at that point, I think Luis's win rate in draft was 64%. Win rate in constructed was 66%. And my win rate in constructed was like 58 or 59%. And my win rate in draft was 66%. So Luis goes in classic Luis fashion. See, Ben, you're only a little bit better than me at draft, right? Because I'm only 2% higher than him in draft win rate at that point, right? But he had been winning 7% more than me in constructed. And while maybe some of that is constructed deck choice, up until that point, we had been working together and playing the same deck in almost every tournament. So if you play that, what that data says to me is that Luis plays technically, let's say 4%, 5% better than me in game. And so I'm drafting substantially more than 2% win rate better than him because it's his in-game play plus his draft picks that produce 64%. And it's my in-game play plus my draft picks that produce 66% at that time, right? That is complicated. It's great. If I ever completely retire from all this stuff, I would love to be a data.
I want to know, I genuinely, is Huey the best limited player of the draft class? Again,
what does limited player mean? Are we
drafting
draft? Are we talking about just making the draft picks? Are we talking about theorist? Are we talking about?
Well, no, Ben. We've already answered the first two questions. I believe, I think that you believe if it was just straight up doing the draft, you'd be better.
Yes, I would take me number one in our draft class.
And if it was just playing the draft, I would be the best.
Yes. And
but
if you
combine the two, Huey might be the best. I actually think he probably would be.
I actually
might be Huey because all three of us are good at all three. Let's be clear, right?
Yeah, fantastic.
We're splitting.
But like, you might not have been good at drafting like in 2010, but you got good at drafting. Like, you're a very smart person who understands Magic well. So once you were in a testing house with like me and Martin and Ifro and other Shuhei and other good drafters, you just got good at drafting.
But 10 years before that, Huey was like Rochester drafting for his whole team at the Pro Tour.
And again, Rochester drafting was for a team was the hardest thing you could do in Magic. I think it's the single best demonstration of skill you can have, but it's still a different skill than tight in game play, for example. That's why these things are so hard to compare, right? Like there's so much nuance that you need to like involve.
So you do agree that Huey's the best limited player of you three. Okay. That's
and by transitive property, Ben probably thinks Huey's the best limited player of all time then.
Well, it's not clear that Huey did that better than Kai, who won 3 straight team Pro Tours or whatever. And he did it with, Marco Bloom on his team, who's not a particularly good technical player.
Wow, just sidewinder Marco Bloom.
I'm not trying to lay a beat. I mean,
he listens every week, man.
I'm not trying to lay a beat. I mean, Marco's fine, but I'm just saying if you were to rank the top 50 technical in-game players of all time, he wouldn't be there, right? Like, I'm not saying that's not an
But you have like Brock and Lindy in that list?
Brock probably.
I mean, if we're going to start sidewindering people,
I don't know, maybe. I don't mind. I don't mind ranking people. Like, again, we're talking.
We know.
We're talking about the best players of all time.
Yeah.
If I say you're the 140th best Magic player of all time, if you get offended by that, like, you have an ego problem, right? I mean, unless you think it's wildly inaccurate. Like, if I said that about Luis, he might get offended by it because he'd just be like, come on, like, I'm obviously better than the 140. But like, if it's a reasonable estimation of you, like if you think you're the 48th best Magic player of all time and I put you at 96th and that offends you, like, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, like, you need to calm down. Yeah. It's true.
But so, like, again, I'm not dissing any of these people. Like Brock, Lindy, Marco Bloom, these are good Magic players. These are people who
they had awesome careers.
They are good enough to top 8 Pro Tours, to be on the Pro Tour for multiple years. Like, I'm not knocking them, but Magic, the Pro Tour has been around for 27 years, 28 years now. I don't know, 96, I think 95, something like that.
96, yeah.
So there are a lot of very talented, very intelligent individuals who have applied themselves to this for some extended period. So like, it is, if you have the success Kai did on a team where, if you're talking about, you can't help your teammates play, for those, a lot of viewers out there probably don't know that was a rule change sometime in the modern era, like in 2015 or something. Back in Kai and Huey's team Roch days, you couldn't help your teammates at all in game. One person could basically draft all 3 decks because like the way the draft portion worked was you guys just all like kind of pointed and whatever. And then eventually somebody pointed at a card and took it or whatever. Like each person had to take the card, but everybody could like point at what they thought should be taken.
Yeah.
So if us 3 were a team and let's say we agreed that I had like final say, like I was the Huey or Kai in this example, like Luis would like point at a card that he thought he should take. And then you would point at it too if you agreed, or you would point at something else if you disagreed. And then I would point at it if I agreed, and then Luis would take it, or I'd point at something else if I disagreed. So we can kind of communicate what we think should happen, but ultimately one person can make every choice, right? Ultimately, like you can just take whatever I point at, Luis can just take whatever I point at, right? So like, if you look at as a measure of skill, which again, this is probably the most skill intensive thing ever in Magic, in my opinion, is team watching, but it's only one. And there are a lot of different skills in Magic. And then I think like Huey was incredible. I think Kai has to be considered the best of all time. Like, I mean, the crushing that he did in Team Roch. And like I said, it's not like he was teaming with the second and third best player in the world. You know, Dirk is probably like a top 50 and Marco's probably like a top 500 in terms of best technical skill of all time in game play. So for Kai to crush like they absolutely did year after year in the Team Pro Tour, it says a lot about Kai's team watching, you know?
Yeah.
All right. One very last hit, and keep the answer brief, Ben. What is the best set to draft of all time?
Champions of Kamigawa still. Splice and Soul Shift are awesome. Low power set is just a real treat.
Something we definitely don't have now. Low power, slow set with a lot of nonsense going on. Ben, are you streaming at all these days? I know that you were, putting a lot of effort into it, but you've since kind of shifted your focus. Can people, catch your stream at all? Or are you kind of off it? What's going on with that?
I love streaming. It was probably one of
you were good at it too, man.
Commentary is the most fun thing in Magic. I would love to do more commentary, and streaming is a form of commentary, obviously. Streaming didn't make much money, unfortunately.
It's a tough
people
one.
have different levels of success, different amounts of donations, but for me, the hourly was quite bad. So I want to stream more. I bought a house last year, so I quit streaming to save up so I could put in more hours of poker and other things. And now, if I get my finances in a point where I can justify allocating 10 to 20 hours a week to streaming, I will happily do it. It is probably the most fun job I've ever had. I really loved it. But I just, it just didn't make much money, frankly. So at the moment, I'm not streaming. I hope to do it again soon in the future. I have started posting draft videos again, just on my YouTube channel.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes for you.
Yeah, it's I think I'm Ben_MTG on everywhere, on Twitch, on YouTube, on Twitter, etc. And I will say, I made a mistake of not really giving people great opportunities to support my content. If I do start doing it again full time, I'll make sure to create a Patreon, maybe have some merch, give people the ability to actually support it, so that I'm not like, well, this doesn't make any money, so I really can't justify it. It's a problem I have, in that I'm not a very money-oriented person.
No.
This could be a 5-hour philosophy stream if I start talking about this, but I believe the point of life is to experience things and to do the things you care about. And I think people who are obsessed with making the most money are very silly. But that said, money is a resource that is important. And like I said, I love streaming, and in a world where money didn't exist, I would be doing it, not playing poker. So I should certainly it was certainly a mistake not to give people more opportunity to monetarily support it. And I won't make that mistake again. If I come back, I'll make sure that people have the ability to support it. But so for right now, I'm not streaming, but I hope to be again soon. I'm occasionally posting videos on my YouTube channel. And you can always catch my hot takes on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll put a link to all that stuff in the show notes. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with us again and give us your thoughts. It was awesome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I always appreciate it. I appreciate the good discussion and the pushback on blue, because I get why it's controversial. And if the data really shows I'm wrong, I'm very open to that. I just think we need to do a nuanced deep dive into it, and not just like, well, people are losing with blue. That's not really.
We'll check back on this after talking to our resident data scientist. We'll figure out what's going on with that. But it was always a pleasure having you on, Ben. A great discussion as usual.
Thanks again for having me. It really was great. I'll come on anytime.
And with that, we're going to call it a show. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the show over at lrcast.com, including all of the shows we've ever done. In fact, over there's also the YouTube channel, which has not all the shows, but a lot of the shows for, the past going back years now that you can watch since we've been doing video, since we got producer Jeff here. But before that, I would put them up just as audio only as well. So you can find them there as well. We want to thank our sponsor, TCGplayer.com. Thanks again, TCG Player, for sponsoring us. And again, if you want to buy anything from TCG Player, we do have a link in the show notes that you can use as an affiliate link. All it does is it just sends you over to regular TCG Player, but it lets them know that we're the ones that sent you over, and that can help support the show. We do appreciate you using that link, and thanks for doing so. That is going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So Ben talking about Team Roch and old Pro Tours reminded me of, there was one Worlds, I was right at the tail end of this. The first Worlds I played at, I was on the U.S. national team with Paul Chian and Ben Lundquist, a really strong team by any estimation. And funnily enough, they were both at PT Philadelphia, Chian in the booth and Ben as a competitor. So,
yeah.
So was it 16 years later, we still invested. But unfortunately for us, this was the first big tournament for any of us. Not the first Pro Tour for us. I think we'd all played like one by then, but it was Team Roch is the team portion of the tournament. We were representing the USA. And despite Tim Ayton giving us a boot camp with Cedric, another face you might recognize, or name rather, we didn't do as well as we could have. I think that we needed a little more experience under our belts. But there was a couple of funny stories that came out of that. One is me and Chian were watching two members of the Chinese team, or one member of the Chinese national team playing against another player from China playing in the Pro Tour, but they had already concluded their match and they were just playing games, but they hadn't filled out the result slip yet. And at one point, the judge comes over and is like, "Hey, you guys need to finish your match." They're like, "No, we already played." And the judge is like, "No, you need to finish this game. I don't see a result." And they're like, they forced the guy to basically beat his opponent, but that was not the guy who won.
What?
And they didn't do a good job explaining themselves, and they got DQ'd, which would DQ the Chinese team as well.
Oh my God, that's a disaster.
It was really bad. It was like the sort of thing that miscommunication compounded. So me and Paul thought it was our duty. We went and talked to the head judge and actually got them undQ'd. Well, our karmic reward was we played the Chinese team in the tournament and they beat us.
Nice. That's so awesome, though. That's good.
But come on, you can sleep at night with that loss.
No, totally fine with that. The other was, as Ben said, you couldn't talk in the limited portion, and the Australian team was captained by this guy named Tim He, who was a really good online grinder. Ended up making a ton in poker after he quit Magic. We knew him from online. Really good at Magic. He was one of the greats who people never really knew about because he quit pretty soon thereafter. But one of his teammates had gotten mad because Tim was making all the decisions during the draft. Like Ben said, it's Team Roch. One person can literally just point at which card you take and you just follow them, right? And they got that their third teammate got so mad that in the second draft, he started counter drafting against his teammates. He's like, "I'm not going to listen to you. In fact, I'm going to screw us all over. You're going down at the ship." It was had the most infuriating experiences I could ever imagine.
Playing the long game, teaching them a lesson for next year.
yeah, it really was. Trust me, this was this guy's last World.
That's incredible.
That is awesome. Yeah, that would be incredible to see, or to be drafting against them, and he's just hate drafting from his teammates, and they're going nuts. I assume. But
they can't talk, so they're just gesturing. It was just truly a sight to behold. So, momentous World that one was.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.